Hi everyone, and welcome to the Wraps Grill Chat, our live stream series here at the Wraps offices. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sharon Waxman. I'm the founder and the editor-in-chief of the Wrap. And we've been having these discussions in our office, and they're usually about something related to media and entertainment. But today we decided that we would take on an issue that is gripping the country, a disease, a malaise, an illness, in my opinion, of gun violence. And this past week, we have seen an incredible amount of public outrage, political stunts, posturing, all in an attempt to try to change a status quo that seems to be intransigent in this country, which is an epidemic of mass shootings. The latest, of course, in Orlando, Florida, where we lost 49 young people while they went out to dance and have a good time at a nightclub. So my good friend and often collaborator Maggie Begley called me up and said, hey, would you like to have a discussion at the Wrap on guns and violence? This was probably 4 days ago. And mostly what we do around here is we cover the world of entertainment. And I said, yeah, definitely. Let's talk about it. Often when these things happen, the finger gets pointed at Hollywood, which is our core community. And we had that debate, shooter games, and I wrote about that many years ago for the Washington Post after Columbine, or violent television shows, or violent movies. That's not what's on the table right now. I think we've moved past that conversation to what role guns play in this pervasive epidemic of violence in this country. So I'm really pleased to be able to welcome today a couple of very prominent and eloquent voices on the subject of guns and violence. Robert Greenwald is our first speaker. I've known Robert for many years, but let me give you his bio, and then you'll understand why we were happy to have him here. Robert is the founder and president of Brave New Films, and he's an award-winning television, feature film, and documentary filmmaker. He's produced and directed more than 50 TV movies and miniseries, including his latest documentary, Making a Killing, Guns, Green, and the NRA. Robert turned to documentary filmmaking in 2002, inspired by pervasive voter rights abuses in the 2000 US presidential election. The documentaries he's produced include Iraq for Sale, The War Profiteers, Outfoxed, Rupert Murdoch's War on Journalism, and Steal This Movie. He has an opinion about stuff. These movies have been streamed across all 7 continents and viewed over 70 million times. Greenwald Robert, I'm going to call you Robert if that's okay, has received numerous awards, including a Peabody AFI's Producer of the Year Award and 25 Emmy nominations. Welcome.
Thank you.
So when I knew Robert was coming, I called up Everytown and I said, can you get us a speaker? And I was thrilled when they said that Richard Martinez would join us. I don't know if any of you have seen Richard before, but certainly made an impression upon me when I first saw him on the news in the wake of the Isla Vista shooting at UCSB, in which he made a passionate argument on behalf of humanity and his son Christopher, who he lost that day. And then we got to know him a bit more. For those of you who've seen Katie Couric's new documentary, Under the Gun, he speaks quite a lot in that film. Richard is an attorney, a gun control advocate, and the father of Christopher Michaels Martinez. Christopher was a victim of the May 2014 mass shooting at UC Santa Barbara that killed 7 people. Since 2014, Richard has dedicated his work to gun control advocacy, being outspoken in the media and pushing elected officials toward action, publicly opposing gun lobby organizations like the NRA. Richard is a senior associate of Everytown for Gun Safety, a movement of Americans working to end gun violence and build safer communities. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
So I'm told that you just came here straight from Sacramento, where you were doing what?
We had a lobby day in Sacramento yesterday, focused on the issue of gun safety, and I was assisting every town that has different elements to it. One of our elements is Moms Demand Action, which is an organization that was founded by Shannon Watts 2 days after the Sandy Hook massacre in 2013. And so I was walking the halls of our state capitol with Moms Demand Action members, passing out literature and encouraging our state legislators to vote for gun safety.
I mean, is there work to be done here in California? We have a lot. I mean, this is a famously liberal state.
California, the legislature in California has been very receptive to gun safety legislation. And what can happen here in California is we can show the rest of the country how it can be done. You know, we had background checks when my son was killed, and sometimes the other side says, well, background checks didn't save your son.
Right.
So why should we have them?
Why bother?
Well, background checks work. They don't work 100% of the time, and we need to make them better. The young man that killed my son had a long history of mental illness, and yet he was allowed to purchase a weapon. We need to do better on the background checks to make sure that people with felony records, people with domestic violence histories, and people with serious mental illnesses do not have guns. In my own family's case, there was a long history. His parents, 2 weeks before, had called the police and said, we believe our child's mentally unstable.
Right.
We need to do better.
Mm-hmm. So you think that there is more to do in California? I mean, this is sort of
yes, and I
one
think
of the arguments that
right.
even in states where you have waiting periods, Connecticut, where Sandy Hook is, has fairly, more on the stricter side of gun control laws, but you can just drive it right over the state lines.
There's one thing that's just recently occurred which is encouraging. The state legislature has allocated $5 million to UCLA to study gun violence prevention. Now, some of you may know that there's a federal law that prevents the Center for Disease Control from studying gun violence in America. And so what we're trying to do, some of us felt that $5 million is not enough, and so we're going to continue to lobby our state legislature to put more money into gun violence research so that we can do the job that the federal government's not doing. But we don't want to do it alone. We're trying to organize a consortium of other state universities from other states that they can work together to do the job that hasn't been done thus far, because every single day that passes without us making our best efforts to reduce gun violence means that more people are going to die in situations that were preventable. And that's not acceptable to me, and it should not be acceptable to you. So,
Robert, your film, which I saw last night, which is touring, which is done and is out and can be seen.
Makingakilling.com. We're having
you can download it on Vimeo.
You can download it. You can screen it. You can show it at a school, at a church, at a library. It's being seen all over, and by Labor Day, it will be seen in over 1,000 screenings, which will make it one of the most widely screened documentaries ever.
So it happens to be the third documentary I've seen this year about gun violence. There was Newtown that I saw at Sundance, and Under the Gun, which was also at Sundance, and your film is the third one, and maybe there's others that I haven't seen. And you have, as I described, made so many films, often about foreign policy or having to do with, the government's deeds or misdeeds in your view. What made you decide to choose this topic at this time?
Well, I decided to do the film 2 years ago, and my job as president of Brave New Films, the key part of that job is deciding which films, which campaigns, short films or long films to do. And I'm very aware that every time I decide to do one film, it means 10, 20, 30 other films don't get done. So when someone first suggested this to me, I was frankly very hesitant. I said, well, what could we do that hasn't been done before? And this person, happened to be my wife, said, go after the NRA directly. This was about 2.5 years ago. And I said, ooh, I don't mind a fight, but And I said, hasn't somebody done that? Hoping that I would be relieved of having to do it. But it turned out nobody had done that. Nobody had gone directly at them and said, you are part of the problem, and here's why you're part of the problem. So that was the first impetus. And then always think about, well, what could we talk about, even with that as the goal, going after the NRA, that hadn't been. So I spent a fair amount of time researching, and it became clear pretty quickly that the NRA now functions as a lobbyist for the gun company. The NRA's job is sell more guns. And there's facts to support that, dollars and cents over and over again. And so now there was motive that made sense. You combined the greed and profit motive, millions and millions of dollars to the NRA to pay for salaries, millions and billions of dollars that the gun companies make, and some of this then began to make sense. So those things came together and convinced me, yes, there was a movie to be made, but more importantly, there was information, there was education, there was connecting the dots, and because we're fortunate enough to make our films free all over, we could reach a significant audience.
You have a whole bunch of very interesting statistics in your film. One that I'll share with you is that the NRA took in $310 million in 2014. And the film has scene after scene of gun makers presenting these massive checks to the NRA, $8 million, $20 million, $2 million. And just how much money the gun makers themselves are making. Colt made $213 million in 2012. The creator of the Glock, Gaston Glock, is a billionaire and, owns a private jet.
And the world's most expensive horse for $16 million.
And the world's most expensive horse, okay? So, you sort of contrast that with the agony, really, of these families like Richard's. And I think what's moving all of us right now, because there is this palpable sense of outrage in the country that our politicians are failing us, that we're being held hostage by a small minority of gun enthusiasts. There's a very large number of gun owners, gun users, gun enthusiasts who would like to see reform. And I think that there is this sense that we are at this critical moment. I mean, just this week alone, just doesn't it feel like there's something that has got to break through? I don't know how you guys feel, but there's a sit-in in the House and a filibuster in the Senate, and every night the late night host just mocking our politicians. Do you guys feel?
Well, I think it started with Chris Murphy
Yeah.
in the filibuster, and I've had the privilege of meeting him just very briefly, but when I did meet him, he told me that he was at the Sandy Hook Elementary School the
Yeah.
day of the shooting,
Yeah.
and that for him, it was personal, and that he intended to keep going until something was done. I think anyone who watched that filibuster would understand that. It was a little bit like Mr. Smith goes to Washington, seeing Chris Murphy up there like that.
A lot like that.
Yeah.
Raise your hand. Who watched the filibuster in this room?
It
Yeah,
was
that's almost
wonderful.
Everybody.
It was wonderful to see politicians getting up there, sincere, honest, and committed. And I think what you saw in Congress yesterday was what results from the frustration and anger that people have. Paul Ryan calls this a stunt. He doesn't get it. To call this a stunt, he doesn't get it. I mean, I travel. My job for Everytown for Gun Safety is outreach. And what I do is I travel around the country, and part of my job is to meet with other survivors and answer questions for them about what it's like and how to best tell their story, to best tell what happened to their families. Because Everytown for Gun Safety is a relatively new organization. We don't have a long NRA has been around forever, and is larger and better funded. And actually, which reminds me, I should correct something. I said we are working on getting funding for gun study. And I should have said my family is. It's not an Everytown project. Everytown, in order to match the gun industry, we have to be more strategic and tactical because we don't have the resources. We don't have 700, well, how many? 400 and
70 million streams?
yeah, we don't have the amount of money they do. They have 700 staffers in their headquarters in Virginia. We have
NRA?
Yes, the NRA.
700
700. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. We have a little over 100, you know. So every town is focused more on the big picture and doesn't get involved so much in individual states. And they don't worry so much about California because California's kind of doing it on their own.
Yeah.
But every town's in Florida fighting campus carry, every town's in Texas. I have been in Texas with the Moms Demand Action members in the state legislature in Texas where they are testifying against campus carry. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to meet a gutsy group of women, people, it's being a mom in Texas and telling the gun culture there in Texas that they need to be responsible, you know, that we should focus on gun safety and that, you know, there's an element in Texas. I sat through some of the hearings. I sat in the listening to the senators in Texas debating campus carry, and some of the arguments that you hear, God-given right to a gun. You know, any infringement on the right to a gun is sacrilege. You know, the argument, more gun, the answer to gun violence is more guns. You know, the United States is already the most heavily armed country in the world. There are more guns in civilian hands in this country than anywhere else in the world, and if more guns made us safer, we would already be the safest country in the world. And obviously, we are not.
What made you decide to stop your life as you knew it and decide to devote yourself full time? It's not such an obvious thing. You know, losing your son is an unimaginable tragedy.
Sharon, there was no decision. It just happened. You know, I gave a speech the day after, well, that speech, the first speech I gave, it was 90 seconds long, and in it I said, when will the insanity stop? Too many have died. We should say to ourselves, not one more. That's how I ended it. And we weren't invited to give that speech. We were calling the sheriff's department to find out where our son's body was, and we couldn't get a hold of anybody. So one of the family members was calling around. They found out there was going to be this press conference, and I said, I was so pissed off that we crashed it. And the speech that most people, that many people have seen, we weren't invited. We just did it. And my advocacy, I can't stay home and watch the television and see Orlando. You know, when we've got Chicago, Charleston, Chattanooga, Lafayette, Roanoke, UCC, Colorado Springs, San Bernardino, and now the largest mass shooting in the history of modern United States in Orlando. Those ones I just mentioned are all in the last year. Every day in the United States, on an average day, 91 Americans are shot and killed, and hundreds more are shot and wounded in situations that don't make the news. Domestic violence, mental illness, suicide. It's the 21st century in the United States of America. We do not have to live like this, and we can come up with better answers than are being offered by the gun lobby.
So Robert, in the film, you come at the issue through the stories of a number of people families who've been affected by gun violence. And they're not related to terrorism necessarily. They're not only related to a crazy person with a gun. Some of them are very quiet stories that don't really get so much attention in the news. They're not so splashy. They're not people checking their Facebook page while doing a mass shooting, which is another kind of through the looking glass fact of the last shooting. You have somebody who's a victim of domestic violence. You have a woman whose husband, estranged husband, came back and shot his wife in front of their 4-year-old. So, just really just unbelievable. And then you bring some statistics about how many cases of gun violence are related to domestic disputes. So how did you go about sort of deciding of how you were going to tell the story of what the impact of guns are in 2016 or 2015?
Well, there was a couple of parts to it. The first is what I tried to do in this film, and done it in a couple of the others, is sort of, my belief is you reach the heart, then you reach the brain. Often in politics, people go right for a laundry list or here's the 17-point program that will fix it. Now, of course, I'm biased because this is what I know how to do, tell stories. But I was very committed in this film particularly to tell personal stories that could be each one of us, that could be anyone. That's the horror of gun violence, right? I mean, I went to Afghanistan and interviewed people there for a film, and I went to Pakistan and interviewed drone survivors, and that was difficult and it was painful, but it was in the context of a war, whatever you thought about the wars. Here it's every single person. So what I wanted to try to do in each story, make it as accessible as possible and try to tell the story almost as if present tense time. So I met a young woman who, and I remember having coffee with her in Boston. She was 6 weeks away from getting married, and her then fiance, no history of mental illness of any kind, had a very bad day, 2 days, we'll never know. No waiting periods with guns, no waiting periods, goes out, buys a gun, and as his mother says on camera, if there'd been 5 hours, he would be alive today. Because suicide is an impulsive act, and people who don't have access to guns but have terrible demons often may do something, but if it's not a gun, they survive. So there was the suicide story. There's a story, and I never thought we would get this story of a mother, and as a parent I get choked up just thinking about it, whose 13-year-old son goes to play with some neighbors, right? And the kid brings out a loaded shotgun that the father has right under the bed. Kid brings it out. Her son is shot. She agreed to participate because she said, if I can help one other family not go through this.
Well, she was amazing because she said she hasn't talked to anyone about the issue. Well, that was one of the mothers who said that she agreed to do it because she felt she might be able to influence others on guns, but she was, and as a mother, you completely understand. You can't even go there. It's just kind of beyond the pale. And in so many of these cases, like both of the ones you're talking about, it's just the randomness of it, and
And unnecessary, completely 100% unnecessary. There are easy, simple solutions so people don't have to go through this. There are laws, there are practical things, and if we did not have the NRA and the gun companies putting all of this money and all of this effort into selling a product that's designed to do one thing, which is kill. If we didn't have that, people would be alive.
All right, so I interrupted you, sorry. So those are a couple of the stories.
And then the last one, the domestic violence that you referred to, is a woman, Kate Ranta, who tells the story, and she was estranged from her husband, and he breaks in. Her then three-year-old son is with her father, the young boy's grandfather, and the husband tries to shoot them all. And domestic abuser who had easy access because of the state of laws to get a gun. We don't know, was it from a gun show? Was it from the internet? You can go online and buy stuff easily. And And that was an effort, again, to bring the story, to make it as accessible to everybody. And then we did the Aurora shooting. Again, the idea was you go to a movie. We start with a group of people, date, planning, phone call, meet you, see you at the movie theaters. And then because he was able to buy a military arsenal,
That
the
was
number
crazy.
of weapons,
When you
in the
remind
beginning,
us
it's
how many, I mean, the guy bought thousands of rounds.
of ammunition and over months, not a yellow flag of any kind. Gee, maybe somebody shouldn't be able to buy all this ammunition and tons of guns. Nothing. And then in Chicago, where you see the combination of gun trafficking, the NRA will say in really basically coded racist terms, those thugs in Chicago. Well, as one father said to me on camera, blacks and Latinos don't make the guns, so how come they're flooding our community? Well, it's because of gun trafficking, it's because of Indiana, it's because of the states around
Because
Chicago.
Indiana has much more lax gun purchase
You
laws.
go to a gun show, buy whatever you want, bring it back. It's an hour drive.
Well, what do you say to people who will argue that if you have a mentally ill person, that it's mental illness, right? That we're not dealing with mental illness in this country. And we have that all the time. We sort of have these parallel debates going on after every mass shooting. And there's the gun people, the anti-gun people, and then there's the why aren't we doing anything about mental health people? Or there's the gun people, and then there's the why aren't we protecting ourselves from terrorism? That's the one we're having after Orlando. It's almost like you're living in two parallel universes, because certainly those two groups are not talking to each other. If you watch Fox and if you watch MSNBC, you think you're talking about two different countries at two different times. But what about that question that people who are mentally ill will kill people if they're intent on doing it, or somebody who is intent on hurting his wife, his estranged wife or ex-wife, will do it anyway? And that's true.
Well, let me back up a second.
No, go ahead, please.
Let me back up a second and put the whole problem kind of in context. In the 50s and 60s in our country, large numbers of people died in motor vehicle accidents. Today, far fewer people die in motor vehicle accidents. It wasn't one problem that was solved, and it wasn't one solution that was implemented. People still die in traffic accidents today, but far fewer than died in the 50s and 60s. We put seat belts in cars. We added shoulder harnesses, airbags, we improved crash worthiness, took drunk drivers off the road, anti-lock brakes. All of those solutions contributed incrementally to a reduction in the number of deaths attributable to motor vehicle accidents. Background checks, universal background checks on all gun sales will not stop every act of gun violence. But seatbelts, wearing a seatbelt in a car today, you can still die. But the fact that you can still die in a motor vehicle accident today wearing a seatbelt is not a good argument to say we shouldn't wear seatbelts, because seatbelts save a significant number of lives. By the same token, even though background checks aren't 100% foolproof, we know from the data from states that have background checks that they do work in a significant number of cases. They improve things. So it's not a good argument to say that just because in one particular instance a background check failed the situation, what it means is we need to improve. We added shoulder harnesses to seat belts. We put the airbags in. We used common sense to figure out solutions to these problems. We are Americans. We have a long history of facing up to difficult problems and solving them. We're the most advanced technological country in the world. Don't tell me we can't figure these things out. I don't have all of the answers to these things, but it's not just mental health is a component of this, but just like with car safety, it was more than one thing. Taking drunk drivers off the road was an element in reducing traffic deaths. As well as the engineering.
I think getting mothers involved is a very good thing. Mothers Against Drug Drivers
Right.
obviously moved the needle on that issue. Now there's a mother's
Right.
for
Moms Demand Action.
Moms Demand
Right,
Action.
and it wasn't treated as a political issue. Moms Against Drunk Driving was a public safety issue.
Well, it seems to me that what's going on this year that sort of gives you the sense that perhaps we're not just going to go around the track and have the exact same outcome every time, which we have, is that it is an election year, and so people's political necks are on the line in a way, in a very proximate time frame, right? That we have 4 or 5 months before people are going to have to answer to the voters about how they choose to act on this legislation or the stuff that's going on the floor of the House and the Senate. So it seems to me that there's 2 tracks. I'm curious which you guys think, and we can open up to the audience in a bit to ask them as well. One is this federal, deadlock. This deadlock we have in the House and the Senate. Could that finally change? I mean, once again, we had the filibuster and a sit-in, and we didn't have obviously a different outcome. There's a compromise bill on a little itty bitty piece of gun reform having to do with waiting periods for people on the no-fly list and all of that. That maybe I spoke to the folks from Everytown in Washington because it's hard to keep up with every minute by minute, but that's what they said, that they basically tabled the last compromise proposal in the Senate with the Senator Susan
Collins is still alive.
Yeah, but the other strategy that's going on is that gun reform activists are going state by state, and that one of those which of those do you think is going to be effective? Because I feel like ultimately one of them is going to be effective. It has to be.
Well, the state by state has had some impact already.
Right.
State by state, city by city, county by county, ballot initiatives. It's really how the LGBT movement was so successful. They did not wait for Washington. And so and the problem with waiting for Washington is then you create a kind of, I'm hopeless, there's nothing I can do. Nonsense, there's lots that can be done. It won't solve all the problems, but it will solve some of them. You need to begin someplace. I mean, on the mental health argument, yes, there are mentally troubled people, but if you take the gun, the assault military rifle, away from the shooter in Orlando, and you give him a knife or a hammer, he's still mentally troubled. It's a radically different situation.
We have a new law here in California since Isla Vista shooting, which allows immediate family members or law enforcement to go in front of a judge, and if they present evidence that their family member, or in the case of police, a suspect, they believe that they present a danger to themselves or other people, they can go in front of a judge, and the judge can order that person not own a gun and not buy ammunition. And so what that does, family members frequently are the first people who know that their loved one is unstable. And now in California, because of this new law, family members have a tool to help protect, because when somebody's mentally unstable, it could be a suicide situation, or it could be that they intend to kill other people. Mm-hmm. And now Everytown is working to take that law into other states. Will it solve all mental health related shootings? No, but it will help. Mm-hmm. There will be cases where now a family can go before a judge and say, our loved one should not have a gun.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, interesting. I'm thrilled that it's there, but it also relates to the bigger problem. In the section in Aurora that we got the tapes of the shooter where he had done interviews after the shooting, and one of the most chilling lines to me, he says, suicidal thoughts become homicidal thoughts. And I remember the first time I heard it, and it's exactly that. Yeah. It can go in either direction. That's why this law and others are so important.
Yeah, and we all know that in these mass shootings, very frequently, the shooter intends suicide.
Yeah,
contemplates.
Suicide, used to call it suicide by cop
yep.
back in the 90s,
yep.
when you'd have to have standoffs on the 405 or the 10 or whatever. So then, what did you do before this happened in your life? You were a lawyer, were you a litigator, were you a...
Well, my son's mother has been a deputy district attorney for 30 years. and I was a defense attorney for about 20. So,
So you'd meet up, you'd sort of argue against each other.
no, we worked in different counties, but both of us have a different kind of understanding about how violence occurs on an everyday basis. I've represented people charged with murder with guns. You know, I've represented people charged with felony and misdemeanor domestic violence. Over the course of 20 years, I've represented people who were mentally incompetent and dangerous. In my experience, there are two classes of mentally ill people. There are mentally ill people, the larger group of mentally ill people have some appreciation for the fact that they're mentally ill and will cooperate to some extent, and it may change over time with medication or treatment. They have some understanding. And then there's a much, much smaller group of mentally ill people who have absolutely no appreciation for the fact that they're mentally ill, will deny that they're mentally ill, will refuse medication, refuse treatment. A smaller percentage of that group are violent. So it's not the vast majority of mentally ill people that I've represented, and I've represented a lot, I wouldn't have regarded as dangerous. More typically, they're self-harming, drug addicted, that kind of thing. But there are, the most dangerous ones are the ones that have no real understanding that they're mentally ill, don't believe they're different, and and their violence is not something that just pops up. You go back, in criminal cases, you get long histories going back to childhood, and you'll find, reports from class of violent behavior.
So it seems just from the pictures I've looked at and from the way you've spoken that you were extremely close with your son.
Yes, and despite everything I could possibly do, he wanted to be a lawyer.
That's right.
Much too. His mother was not as strongly against it as I was. I tried everything to try to get him interested in science and anything else. But no, he was an English major and intended to go into law, and he would have. Extremely. Chris was, one of his friends said, he was a badass athletically, and he was a badass academically, but in the nicest way. And that's true. He was ruthlessly competitive, but never a bad loser, and never.
What was his sport?
Well, he played almost every sport, but he settled on basketball and played point guard in high school. And one of his cousins was describing what it was like to play against Chris, and he said, the fact that I was related to Chris made no difference to him whatsoever, and he was brutal. But he was in the moment. One thing about Chris was he didn't care about, he loved to play sports. He loved the competition, and he didn't care what the score was. He didn't care about the last play. He was there to play, and he would play. It didn't matter if his team was losing. He was playing to the end because he loved to play. It was terrific. He was just such a delightful child, and we miss him more than you could ever know, really.
And did you ever worry about him
No,
being in Santa Barbara?
No,
Sounds kind of absurd to say that, but
And that's
it's
true.
his first year, right?
No,
his second year?
He'd almost finished 3 years and 2. He was supposed to go to Queen Mary University, London, in the fall, and he was killed in the spring. And I can't tell you how angry I am. I mean, what people heard when I gave those early speeches was rage. The idea that in the 21st century, in this country, the United States of America, you can lose a child to gun violence. If we had done what we should have done after those 20 kids were killed in the Sandy Hook, 26 and 7-year-olds were killed in that elementary school in Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut, and we as a country did nothing. The NRA went in there and killed that legislation in the U.S. Senate. Pat Maish, who was one of the heroes at Tucson, stopped the shooter in Tucson when Gabby Gifford was wounded, was up in the gallery, and she yelled shame from the Senate gallery that day, and they escorted her out, and nothing more was said. They got away with it. You know, the NRA is a minority in this country, and we've let them get away with it. And, you know, we need to put a stop to it, really.
I'm going to open it up to questions or comments. Anybody has a question? Go ahead. You stand up and speak up. I don't know if I'll repeat it so the live stream audience can hear it as well.
Maggie Bagley. I have a question for both of you, actually. Since we are sitting here in the offices of RAP, my thought is, what can the entertainment industry do in a real way? Both the production element of our industry, as well as the very powerful celebrity, the cult of celebrity that we have here that influences the world over. And I'm wondering specifically what actions they can take if they choose to, which I assume they would want to. And additionally, you know, what responsibility or what efforts can be taken from a creative perspective, from the studio perspective, from the content perspective? Is there any connective tissue there that we should be looking at? Any thoughts in that area?
So the question is, the RAP covers Hollywood. What can Hollywood do to make an impact on this issue, either from the celebrity perspective or the content storytelling perspective?
Well, from the celebrity perspective, I think it's clear, and that is to use the amazing platforms with the huge audiences that celebrities have. There are a lot of them have spoken out about guns and violence, and I hope that they will continue to. Alec Baldwin did a little video for us where he encouraged people to sign up and have a free screening of the film. Again, it's something specific and real that you can do. We are in the process of reaching out with Maggie's help to try to get other celebrities with big platforms so that they can use their voice and feel they are actually doing something and actually be doing something. The storytelling side of it, I hope again over time that this notion that millions and millions of dollars are being made by Wayne LaPierre gets almost $1 million a year. That's just what we can find out about. There's apparently a lot of other money. The zillions of dollars that the gun companies are getting, that gets baked into the storytelling in as many different ways as possible over time. Now, I understand people who are working in the traditional commercial field are working to turn a profit, to make product that is people pay for and sell as many go to as many screenings and pay as much money as possible. But within that context, there are things that people can and I hope will be doing, because we're at a time now, and maybe this is the tipping point that you were talking about, Sharon, we're at a time where people are scared. And they're scared for their lives, for their families, for going to school, going to church. Not every minute, but there's a fear that did not exist before. And if we can speak to that fear in a responsible fashion, and we can give people outlets for how to marshal and use that fear, rather than turn and buy more guns or beat up somebody from another country, there are enormous opportunities.
I also wanted to say, I'm going to let you answer, but I wanted, in the meantime, if people who are watching over the live stream want to send in questions, send your question to the hashtag GrillChat, and if there's good questions, we will read them up here in live. So,
if they're good.
If they're good.
Only good ones.
Only good ones.
A component of Everytown for Gun Safety is our Creative Council. And our Creative Council is led by the actress Julianne Moore. We have, to date, about 100 celebrities that have signed on to our Creative Council, including J.J. Abrams, Judd Apatow, Ron Howard. There's a list. You can go to our Everytown for Gun Safety Creative Council list, and I have to say, Julianne Moore has been just absolutely unbelievably brave and
Why do you think she's involved in this? I mean, we've worked with her on many things, and she's a fantastic actress, but why this issue for her? Do you know?
I think because she's a mom.
She's a mom.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's speculation, but that's what I think. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't care who you are. I don't care how rich you are. I don't care how famous you are. If you have a child, we have lockdown drills now in our schools. It can happen. It's every town for gun safety. It happens in every town. What are you going to do? You send your child to UCLA, Stanford, good school. It can happen.
Well, it just did happen at UCLA 2 weeks ago during finals. It just happened. Somebody came in with a gun, shot a professor, and they shot him, but he was definitely would have shot more people.
I have met people from all walks of life, from the concierge in a hotel that I was staying at that came up to me and expressed his fear for his children, to billionaires. And I'm not just talking about Bloomberg who founded, I'm talking about other billionaires who've told me, I have children and I can't, I can't.
You can't protect,
right.
You can't protect yourself.
Yeah.
Right now, I think there's that feeling out there that you can't.
What Robert said is we don't need to focus on the fear. We need to, a gun is really a simple answer to fear, but it doesn't really solve the problem in reality. The reasons why we have gun violence is because we have some really unaddressed problems in the country that need to be solved.
I mean, this is a pretty violent country in general. Violence goes very deep in the beginning of the history of this country. I think that's been pointed out.
Well, other countries have problems with violence too. I mean, you heard about the hooligans in the UK, but they don't use guns. There's a cultural component to it. And other countries watch the same violent videos and play the same violent video games, and they don't have these problems. But don't tell me that there aren't solutions to these issues. We just haven't tried. We haven't even tried. We've been prevented from studying these problems and trying to solve them. And so I cannot accept that this is the kind of country that our children deserve. My child deserved better than this, and
How do you live now? I mean, you were working as a lawyer.
Well, I'm on staff. I had 200 clients, I think, at the time that Chris was killed. I have not been back in court. I was blessed with having friends, other attorney friends that came in and took over my cases, but I have not been back in court. To me, everything that I thought was important before Chris was killed is not important to me anymore. What's important to me is that no other family should have to go through what we did, or that another child like mine should have to die in the way he did. It's ridiculous, it's unacceptable, and we shouldn't tolerate it. So.
Question here.
On the theme of fear and dealing with fear, when you hear people that have firearms, they say the solution is more guns, and they're very passionate about it. Robert, were you concerned about going up against this sort of 800-pound gorilla and sticking your neck out and sort of being in their crosshairs? And was it difficult to get partners behind you to make your movie? What were the thoughts behind that?
So the question is whether Robert was afraid of the people in the NRA in making his film. And the title of the film is, takes aim at the NRA, so it's not that subtle.
Making a killing, guns, greed, and the NRA. Yes, I was concerned. And I don't want to say too much, but we took some steps to be as careful as we could, although ultimately the only way to avoid any danger was not to do the film, and I chose to do the film. And dealing with people who have both access to weapons, tempers, and can be irrational, presented challenges. And there were some challenging days, but my family was very supportive of doing this.
Well, be more specific. What do you mean? Did you get threats?
I'd rather not go into that. I think there were difficult days, but you know, he's talking to somebody who, when we did the film opposing the Iraq War, we've got constant telephone death threats. So, you know, I was starting with a bar of it could probably only be
This was
better.
better? This was better? Okay.
Compared to that, when the country was insane because of, you know, Fox and O'Reilly, and you were miserable, horrible, anti-American if you dare question anything. So, this was not as bad.
Before we wrap, Richard, you have these amazing bracelets on,
I have
which
only one.
you are wearing the names of
Yeah,
other
I've got one.
victims. Yeah, Robert's got one.
I've just got Bosley.
But so you
yeah.
told me
Yeah.
before, yeah,
Yeah.
you told me before you started that the parents of these victims, the families, gave them to you.
Well, first you should realize they're a couple layers deep. They're not, you can't see all of them because they're covering up. But as I've traveled around the country, I've met survivors of gun violence, people who have been shot and recovered, and I've met families that have had loved ones shot and killed. And these that I wear are given to me by family members, and for most of them I know the stories. There are a couple that just showed up in the mail and I never met the people or and don't know much about the stories, but for most of these
Can you tell us about a couple of the people you're
I
wearing on your
can.
wrist?
This green one says, "What would Dawn do?" And Dawn Hochsprung was the principal at Sandy Hook Elementary School. She was awarded the Presidential Medal for Heroism because she tried to stop a shooter. And this one was given to me by Erica Lafferty. She's the daughter of Dawn Hochsprung.
I think she encountered him
In the hallway, right.
As I recall, not an
I mean,
expert,
she
but-
could have run, she could have
Right.
gone the other way, but she did not. She
Right.
confronted him and tried to make him stop, and she was killed. This purple one is given to me by Roxana Taylor Greene, and her daughter Christina was about 9 years old when she was shot and killed in Tucson when Gabby Gifford was shot and wounded. And Pat Mach was there and kicked the magazine away from the shooter while he was trying to reload. That's the woman that yelled shame from the gallery in the Senate after Sandy Hook.
She was with Gabby Gifford?
Yes, Pat Mach was with
Right.
Gabby Gifford. Well, she was a bystander. She wasn't with
she
Gabby.
was a bystander.
Yeah, she was a bystander. I think she's an RN. And the shooter was trying to reload, and she knocked the magazine out of his hands. And she's a hero. I mean, and she went to the vote on the Sandy Hook legislation that was in the Senate, and that's when she yelled shame. And I know her, and she's a friend of mine now. One of the things that I find is that my closest friends now are other survivors, because no one really knows what it's like except other survivors. You know it's bad, but until you've lived it, you don't really know. It takes you down to a place you've never been before. Really, it does. To lose a child in this way, or a loved one in this sudden, violent way unexpectedly, is just, you know, it's a terrible thing. But for me, advocacy and trying to bring some meaning to my son's death is the only thing I can do. It's not even a choice for me. I cannot sit at home and watch another shooting. I mean, when they happen and I'm not on the road, I head to the gym and I work out like a madman and then try to get back on the road as quick as possible, because every single day that goes by means another one of these preventable situations. Not everyone, you know, I don't believe
Where were
we'll-
you when you heard about Orlando?
I don't remember right now.
But what was your,
Well,
do you
well,
remember
I don't
what
remember
you-
right now because, you know, I was when I was with the moms yesterday in Sacramento, and listening to what was going on. When we were in Sacramento, we had a sit-in. We took a picture of us all sitting down. I'm so in the moment that I don't spend much time reflecting. I've done a couple of television interviews in the past couple of days. I haven't seen any of them. And so when you ask me a question like that about what was I thinking of when, I'll tell you what I remember about thinking about Orlando was my remembering how long we had to wait to learn that Chris was dead. We didn't find out that we knew that Chris was injured. We knew that he was missing. We'd gone to the hospitals, we couldn't find him, and he wasn't answering his phone. Some friends said that they thought he'd been struck by a car. And it was over 3 hours before the police told us.
You
that
had to drive.
Yeah, we drove
over-
down to Santa Barbara from
from-
San Luis Obispo, and we went to the hospitals. But when I think about when Orlando was going on, I was thinking about those families that were waiting to find out. We were calling Chris and there was no answer, and his phone was laying next to him where he was laying dead, where he was shot. And I was thinking about the first responders in Orlando who said that when they went into that nightclub, that amongst the bodies were cell phones that were ringing. And I know what that's like. Some of those families didn't find out that their loved ones were dead till the next day. You know that something bad has happened, and you don't want to believe it. And so for hours, you're thinking, well, maybe he went to visit a friend. Maybe they weren't there, But somehow, somewhere there, you know that it's possible. And then when it happens, your world just drops away. It's just, so every time one of these things happens, all of us are like this that have been through this. When these things happen again and again, it reminds us of what happened when it happened to us, So.
So you relive it in a small way.
Well, yes, you do. Right? It reminds you of what it's like to go through that, and things. Even TV commercials or something. I'll see something about a father and son and stuff, and just. We really owe it to our families. Don't wait till it happens to your family. Do something now. The idea of pretending that this is just something that happens to other people is not reality. It's going on all around us and every day.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. Thank you for coming, Robert.
Sure.
We're going to stick around and have conversations among ourselves and have a drink. I think we could all use a drink after that.
I gotta go to the
Police.
airport.
Yeah.
We'll raise
Where
one
are you
for
going?
Christopher for sure.
Home.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.